Title: The Saint Beneath the Ash. Year: 132,500,000. Era: Cradle of Titans. Author: Jeremy Levan, and Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. They called him the Wounded Saint, not because he healed, but because he refused to stop bleeding. He walked from city to ruin, across salt flats and silence, his robes frayed with ash and stitched in places with the kindness of strangers. His face was never hidden, even when others begged him to wear the mask. He bore no weapons, no armor, no clever words, only his wounds and his values. In the kingdom of Atraxis, where truth was taxed and virtue bartered in shadow markets, the saint became a myth before he arrived. They expected a zealot, a rebel, a fraud. What they got was a man who asked questions so gently they broke stone. He found them off to the flame in a prison of her own design. Once she had been a champion of virtue, a voice in the court, a flame that lit paths no one dared tread. But compromise by compromise, her edges balled. She wore a crown of caution now, a tether of safety. "You came to judge me," she said. "No," he replied. "I came to see if you still burn." She laughed bitterly. "On cinders. Then you are ready." And he held out his hand. Chapter 2. They fled together, not from enemies, but from expectations. She shed titles. He shed silence. They traveled to the Pilgrim's Gap, a place where winds whispered every lie you still told yourself. She fell to her knees. "I gave up everything I believed in to survive." He knelt beside her. "Mill, you forgot how to speak your truth. Let's remember it together." They climbed the black stair, an obsidian trail etched into the cliffs of old prophecy. At the summit stood a brazier, unlit for centuries. She lit it with her name, not the one given by court, but the one she had hidden in poetry as a girl. The flame turned violet. Below, cities blinked. People looked up and remembered. Chapter 3. The Council of Interpretation summoned them. They offered positions, platforms. Betty, the saint, declined. "We did not climb to return to comfort." The moth stood beside him. "We climb to prove that being true is not a luxury. It's a calling." They left again. This time they didn't walk alone. Others followed those weary of the skies, those tired of winning while empty. They weren't saints. They weren't rebels. They were becoming. Each day, the saint spoke a little less. Each day, the moth shone a little more, until the world no longer needed to hear them. It felt them in changed laws, in unburdened tears, in children who dared speak aloud what once were in silence. "You are not broken," the saint had once whispered. "You are becoming unspeakably whole in ways the world forgot how to name." And at last, the world remembered. One wound at a time, one truth at a time, one step toward flame. Title: The Light Beyond the Veil. Year: 132,307,692.3. Era: Cradle of Titans. Author: Jeremy Levan, and Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. The healer who wounds and one will never treat those who refuse to look in a mirror. She lived alone in the Edgewood marshes, surrounded by roots and whispers. Her hut smelled of herbs, regret, and something ancient. People came to her bleeding, sometimes from war, more often from within, and she offered them one thing: a silvered mirror. It never showed what they expected. To some it revealed past versions of themselves, children, liars, lovers. To others it showed futures they feared or desired. And to the rare few, it showed only fog. "Fog means you're hiding from the light," she would say. "Your last excuse is the veil covering the light that's been waiting." Most left. One didn't. His name was Darren, and he came to slay the mirror serpent. Chapter 2. The mirror serpent haunted the ravine of faces, a cursed gorge that shimmered like water and whispered doubts to those who crossed it. Dozens had tried. Men returned. Darren was chosen for his lineage, strength, and reputation. What he lacked was belief in himself, in his worth. The healer studied him. "You think killing the serpent will make you whole? It will make me useful." She handed him the mirror. He saw himself older, crowned, crying, "That's not who I am. Not yet." She gave him no weapon, only 3 words. "No, then go." He crossed the ravine. Chapter 3. The serpent was not a beast. It was reflection made flesh. It hissed his doubts aloud. "You failed your father. You're nothing without titles. You only leave because others kneel." Aaron dropped to his knees, shaking. Then remembered the mirror. He raised it to the serpent, and for the first time it recoiled, because in that moment Darren didn't deny the fears. He faced them. "I don't need to be perfect," he whispered. "Just present." The serpent shattered. The ravine stilled, and the path opened. Aaron returned, not as a hero, but as himself. He did not wear a crown. He taught others how to hold mirrors. The healer who wounds nodded in approval and left. Her hut disappeared. Her mirrors remained, because true healing isn't about the wound. It's about seeing past the veil, the light that was always waiting. Title: The Prophecy of Quiet Hands. Year: 132,001. 115,384.6. Era, Cradle of Titans. Author, Jeremy Levan and Rise of the Zodiac, Series 2025. Chapter 1. They called her the Bone Break Bride, not because she broke others, but because she broke herself to protect them. She had once been promised to the Warden King of Sector Vale 9, a political marriage to keep rebellion just below boiling, but on the day of her betrothal, she shattered her own arm against the iron gates of the city and walked into exile, not out of fear, out of clarity, because she had seen what no one else dared name the Warden. King did not want the wife. He wanted a symbol. So she refused to be one, and vanished. Years later, she returned wearing a cloak of stitched flags, each one torn from fallen regimes, each one earned not in blood, but in healing. With her came whispers of a midwife who delivered not just children, but new beginnings, a masked midwife of becoming. Together they began again, not as rulers, as reminders. Chapter 2. In the fractured outposts of the 33rd Meridian, loyalty was measured by silence and survival. The Bone Break Bride offered neither. She spoke often, clearly, without permission. When officials tried to exile her again, she invited them to sit. They did. When she walked into labor camps, she brought not weapons, but questions. Who among you knows how to grow food? Who among you knows how to tell stories? Who among you remembers your own name? And slowly, the people began answering. The masked midwife worked beside her, never unmasking, never speaking in meetings. But they delivered every strategy the bride dreamed. They built escape tunnels not with tools, but alliances. Every stone turned was done by hands that used to tremble. And when the guards came, the bride did not flee. She knelt and asked, "Who here will lead when I am gone?" 3 voices rose. That was enough. Chapter 3. The crackdown was brutal. Buildings burned. Maps were rewritten, but the people did not forget. They rebuilt the tunnels. They passed on the stories. They whispered at every gate and checkpoint. When the fight is hardest, the reward tastes like prophecy, and the stars, silent as always, remembered what silence dare not speak. The bride disappeared again. Some said she was taken. Others said she walked into the clouds with nothing but her bannered cloak. The midwife remained, delivering, uplifting, never seen, always known. And those 3 who rose, they never claimed power. They shared it, taught others to break their own chains, to kneel not in submission, but in invitation, because genuine leadership does not shine alone. It lights others, and then disappears into the stars, which never forget. Title: The Salt That Held Us. Year: 131,923,076.9. Era: Cradle of Titans. Author: Jeremy Levan and Rise of the Zodiac, Series 2025. Chapter 1. They said her name had been buried in salt, not lost, just hidden, preserved, waiting to be remembered. She went by many titles now. Merchant of the Pale Shore, Keeper of the Last Brine, the name buried in salt. Her trade was simple. She carried messages carved into salt tablets between islands, varying truths that paper could not hold. She never asked payment, only a story in return. He arrived during low tide, wrapped in wind and worn boots, calling himself a soul mirror, a drifter, a sculptor of reflections. He claimed he could carve a person's truth just by watching how they carried silence. "You speak little," she said. "I listen much," he replied. She smiled and offered him passage, not across the sea, across herself. Chapter 2. Together they delivered words of reconciliation and parting, love and regret. Salt eroded with time, so the stories had to be remembered, not stored. Every message she carried helped someone heal. Every sculpture he carved helped someone see. But they shared nothing of their own pasts, until one day they arrived at a ruined dock where no one waited. The tablet she carried read only, "Forgive me." She hesitated. "This one is for me," she said softly. He didn't speak. Instead, he placed a mirror in the sand. It showed her not as she was, but as she had been before betrayal silenced her voice. "You buried your name," he said, "not to forget it, but to protect it." She cried, "Salt," again, and whispered her name. He etched it into a new tablet and placed it in the sea. Chapter 3. They kept traveling, but something shifted. Now they shared more. She told him of the sister she once lost to pride. He told her of the life he abandoned after sculpting a tyrant's vanity into legend. Their gifts, message, and reflection grew more powerful, more vulnerable. They taught others how to carry stories without bitterness, how to give without emptying themselves. And at the last island, where sea met sky in a haze of silver, she gave him her last tablet. It read, "Stay." He kissed her hands, rough with brine, and stayed, not as a drifter, as a partner. They opened a shrine of mirrors and salt, not to worship, but to witness. People came from everywhere to tell their truths, and laughed lighter, because the truest wealth is what you give away freely, not what you grip tightly, especially when that gift is yourself. Title: The flame you cannot hold. Year 131,730,769.2. Era, Cradle of Titans. Author, Jeremy Levan, and Rise of the Zodiac, Series 2025. Chapter 1. The first flame had not gone out, it had simply hidden, buried beneath the ruins of a Pyrean sanctum. It flickered in the heart of a forgotten chamber where memories smoldered and promises turned to ash. Only one still guarded it, the last guardian of the first flame. She did not keep others away. She simply watched, waiting for someone to understand what they were truly approaching. She fed the flame not with fuel, but with memory. Laughter overheard, sorrow passed through, love never confessed. And then one day, the whisper in the womb arrived. A child not of flesh, but of echo. A being born from the hopes of those never born, from stories parents told of children they never met. She carried no shadow, but left warmth in every footstep. The guardian rose from her vigil. "You are not meant to burn," she said. "I am not meant to last," the whisper replied. And together they sat. Chapter 2. The whisper asked no questions. She simply listened to the flame, to the silence between the guardian's breaths, to the old walls that wept when the wind turned. She told the guardian stories she could not have known, tales from the time before the flame was forged, of those who had built it not to light the world, but to remind it of its warmth. And the guardian, for the first time in decades, cried. "You remember them," she whispered. "I am them," the whisper replied. "But he will fade," the whisper nodded. "And that's why I'm here, to give what remains." They tended the flame together for a final season, and when the sky wept embers and the earth groaned beneath old bones, the whisper offered her form, not in sacrifice, in gift. Chapter 3. The flame grew not in heat, but in presence. It pulsed with empathy. With every life, the whisper never lived yet still remembered, and the guardian stepped back, letting go. No fanfare, no legacy, only the knowledge that empathy had become fire, that connection had become light, and the whisper, her shape now smoke, whispered one last time. Love, at its deepest, sometimes means letting go without closure. The guardian remained, tending not to the flame now, but to those drawn by it. She welcomed all, listened to each, and when someone asked why the flame felt like being seen, she simply answered, because someone came who didn't need to speak, only to understand. And the world warmed quietly, forever idle. The garden of sharp truths. Year 131,538,461.5. Era, Cradle of Titans. Author, Jeremy Levan, Rise of the Zodiac, Series 2025. Chapter 1. The thorned embrace lived at the edge of the woundwood. Not within it, no one lived within it, but just near enough that the trees could whisper their regrets into her windows each night. Her cottage was a greenhouse for hard truths, and her garden bloomed with flowers that bloomed only when lied to. She was feared by many, trusted by few, but none left her unchanged. One dusk, a stranger arrived, small, silent, thin as a shadow, but twice as heavy in presence. Eyes like cracked glass. The child, or something that once had been. He said nothing. He held a note. "I am the child made of absence." And in his hand, a single thorn from her garden. She did not ask how. She only said, "Then you are ready." Chapter 2. The woundwood was once a city, now overgrown with memory and grief. Its vines twisted with rumors and broken oaths. Every step required intention, every branch consent. She led the child through the outer rain, where the bark bled if touched with insincerity. He said nothing, but she saw him grimace just once, when a flower bloomed near his feet. "You're afraid of what's missing," she said. He nodded. "Not from your past," she added. "From your future." They reached the heart-rooted tree, with no leaves, only thorns, each one inscribed with truths unspoken. To take one was to change. To take two was to bleed. He reached for 3. She gasped, and let him. He did not cry, but the trees did. Chapter 3. They emerged days later. The child, now taller, older, changed not in body, but in posture, in gaze. He whispered, "I was made of absence because I never let truth touch me." She handed him a mirror woven from vine and silver. He saw himself and smiled, not from pride, from recognition. He turned back toward the woundwood. She caught his wrist. "You go in alone. You may not return." "I don't plan to return," he said. "I plan to transform it," and walked back into the trees. Years later, the woundwood bloomed, not with fruit, with clarity. Travelers said the trees now whispered guidance instead of warnings. The vines healed instead of binding, and somewhere within, the thorned embrace tended a garden no longer full of thorns, but of doors. And above it all, that single phrase carved into a stone. Truth is a key with teeth that freeze and wounds in equal measure. And so do we, if we let it. Title, The Ground Beneath the Ice. Year 131,346,153.8. Era, Cradle of Titans. Author, Jeremy Levan. Rise of the Zodiac, Series 2025. Chapter 1. The Scholar of Silence had no name, only a mask stitched from pages too sacred to burn. She wandered the frost-bound cities of the Northreach, where breath froze in prayer and adversity was worn like jewelry. Wherever she went, people asked for guidance, healing from loss, clarity in chaos, strength for choices long delayed. She gave all she could, but never removed the mask, never spoke of her own cracks, until she reached the village of Crowden, perched on the edge of the teeth of winter glacial mountain, said to house the dreams of forgotten doubts. There she met a boy whose nightmares reshaped the world around him, the dream in the teeth of winter. Chapter 2. The boy was a conduit. His fears became frostbite. His hopes stirred avalanches. They called him cursed. He called himself no one. The scholar stayed, not to cure, but to witness. She read the snow-like scripture, interpreting each drift and crack as metaphor. She told the villagers that the boy was not broken, only unanchored. But how do you anchor a dream? They asked. By naming what you never dared face, she replied. So she took the boy into the mountains. Together they climbed where no one had gone, into the frozen breath of old gods. There she removed her mask, and wept, not because of him, because of herself. Chapter 3. She told him the truth, that she once tried to fix the world to avoid fixing herself. That every scroll she carried was a mirror she refused to look into. To fix others without healing yourself is to build on broken ground, she said. He nodded, and named his fear aloud. And I will always be too much for others to hold. The wind stilled, the mountains exhaled, and the snow beneath them melted not with heat, but with grace. They returned change. The boy began sleeping without shaking. The scholar began speaking without masks. Together they taught others not how to escape pain, but how to listen to it. And as Crowden thawed, so did its people. They built with what remained not perfect, but present, because adversity does not define the wound. It defines what you choose to become after. And they chose to become whole, in silence, in story, in snow. Title: The Masquerade of Eagles. Year: 151,153,146.2. Year: Cradle of Titans. Author, Jeremy Levan. Rise of the Zodiac, Series 2025. Chapter 1. Every city has its gods. In Varn, they were called masks. Not divine, not immortal, just worshipped. Everyone wore one. Some were carved from jade, others from bone or brass. And they weren't just decoration. They were identity. Jobs, privilege, permission to speak, each dictated by the mask on your face. And the person who made them, the masksmith. No one knew their true name. They lived beneath the city in the catacomb market, accepting only trades and riddles as payment. They were feared, adored, pitied, depending on the face you wore. But the masksmith had grown tired of crafting titles for tyrants, tired of forging smiles for silence, tired of hearing the same question: can you make me someone better? So when the echo of desire appeared, a figure who danced through class barriers and etiquette with scandalous ease, the masksmith watched and waited until one night the echo slipped through their forge, flanked by laughter and wine, and whispered, "I don't want a new face." The masksmith blinked. "I want everyone else to lose theirs." Chapter 2. They hatched the plan over burned tea and stolen fruit. A grand masquerade sponsored by the High Mask Council was scheduled to mark the city's 10,000th year. A display of opulence, of masksmanship, of tightly decrypted status. The echo of desire, whose mere presence disrupted tradition, would host. But here was the twist. The masksmith designed a new line of masks, identical, unmarked. To the rich, they were called the ultimate elegance. To the poor, they were alone you may keep. No one knew the other had them too. At the masquerade, the ballroom was a sea of sameness. No rank, no house, no lineage, just dancing. Chaos bloomed. The noble bowed to a baker. The servant debated art with the magistrate. Two rivals fell in love and didn't realize it until morning. And as dawn broke, the masksmith stood atop the fountain and shouted, "Character is etched in how we act when no one sees." Then dropped their tools into the basin. Chapter 3. The council was furious. But whom could they punish? The masks had equalized everyone. Laws were reviewed, protocols updated, but the people had tasted something strange, possibility. The echo vanished again, trailing rumors of new pranks, new truths. The masksmith retired not from work, but for orders. They now made masks only for plays, comedies, children's games, stories. And every year on the masquerade's anniversary, the people wore the same plain mask. To remember the night they saw each other, really saw, without labels, without lies. And Varn didn't collapse. It evolved, slowly, strangely, but certainly, because equality wasn't enforced. It was invited, by laughter, by delusion, by one maskless truth at a time. Title: The Pattern Beneath the Silence. Year: 130,961,538.5. Yura. Cradle of Titans. Author Jeremy Levan. And Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. The uncut thread was not a person but a presence. A weaver who never left her high attic above the market of whispers, her fingers always moving, spun threads not of silk but consequence. She watched the city of Calvin through cracked panes and wordless breath, recording every unnoticed choice in her loom, because she believed something no one else dared. Every action mattered, even the ones no one saw, especially those. One night, during a festival of false lights, she spotted the silent storm, a figure cloaked in gray, weaving through crowds without sound or trace. Where they walked, small things shifted. A child avoided a spill. A merchant paused before a fatal shortcut. A riot never sparked. They were no hero, they were cause. She left her attic, for the first time in 20 years. Chapter 2. The storm had no voice, not by fate, but though. Their silence was a map of past errors, shouted orders that once raised a village, arguments that split a cause. So now they acted through presence, not command, and every act they made rippled slowly, deliberately. The thread followed. Each evening, she stitched the changes they created, a tapestry that shifted from chaos to subtle harmony. They met in a sunken library where books hummed with histories that never made the record. "You know what you are," she whispered. The storm nodded. "But do you know what I am?" she asked. They reached out, fingers rough, reverent, and she placed a thread in their hand, not to bind, to share. Chapter 3. A plot brewed in the merchant houses, poison and grain. Sabotage in ships. Nothing large, nothing loud, just enough to unravel years of trust. Together they wove the counter thread. They left messages in forgotten languages on bread crusts, warnings stitched into festival banners, wills baked into salt. No alarms, only actions, each subtle, each exact. The conspiracy unraveled before it began, and no one knew who to thank. The market thrived, the riots never came, and the world turned unknowing. In her attic once more, the uncut thread stitched the final phrase into her loom. What victory hides in pride, loss often reveals in silence. She never saw the storm again, but that thread silver gray, soft with certainty, ran through every future she mapped. And Calvin. It became a city where small things were seen, where every act was honor, and where silence at last spoke the loudest truth. Everything matters, even this. Title. The Mirror Beneath the Flame. Year. 130,769,230.8. Era. Cradle of Titans. Author Jeremy Levan. And Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. The first flame had burned for 10,000 years, not as fire, but as memory. It was kept in the sanctum of fire, a tower built from obsidian and sorrow, balanced atop a rift where time once bled. And for 10,000 years, a guardian watched over it. When one fell, another rose. Each carried the vow, the blade, and the wound. The current guardian was the last. She knew this, not because of prophecy, but because she had read the patterns in ash. Empires didn't fall in flames in a war. They eroded. She bore no name, only the title, last guardian of the first flame. Her eyes were dim, but her voice could command lightning. She did not sleep. And then, one evening as the sky cracked under the weight of a rising tide, a girl appeared, soaked, starving, holding a conch shell that hummed with voices older than the flame. "I'm the tide caller," she said. "You're too late," said the guardian. "For what?" "For peace." Chapter 2. The tide caller had not come for war. She had come for truth. She claimed the sea was rising not by curse, but by consequence. That the flame had warmed more than hearts that had scorched balance. That while the guardian kept vigil, the world below had burned in silence, the screams swallowed by ritual. The guardian listened, then showed her the archives. Scrolls written in blood and duty, maps that only marked battles, edicts declaring silence sacred, names erased in favor of titles. "This is justice?" the tide caller asked. It was meant to protect. It became an excuse. Outside, the tide laughed higher. Villages drowned. Rebels whispered. The guardian finally asked, "Why come here?" "Because the void doesn't beckon," said the tide caller. "It mirrors." And when the guardian looked into the flame that night, she saw her own face fractured not by age, but by inherited blindness. Chapter 3. They lit no war. They dismantled no tower. They simply opened the gates, let the people in, showed them the flame, and with its toll, they read the scrolls, allowed truths and lies alike. The guardian burned the ones that glorified vengeance. The tide caller saved those that taught regret. Some resisted, but most stood still, listening, understanding, and in time, the flame flickered, not from loss but release. The guardian passed her blade to no one. She laid it on the altar, walked into the sea, and vanished. The tide caller remained, not to guard, but to guide. She taught that injustice was not an enemy, but a wound, and wounds left unattended become monsters. The people learned to speak pain aloud, to grieve, to question, to forgive. And in the place where fire met water, a garden bloomed, lit not by flame, but by memory healed, because the void never called. It waited, and finally it was answered. Fatal, the gate beyond the shadow. Year 130,576,923.1. Era, Cradle of Titans. Author, Jeremy Levan, and Rise of the Zodiac, Series 2025. Chapter 1. A hunter of night was not feared for what he killed, but for what he spared. In the shadowed district of Ireli's Hollow, where dreams rotted before they were born, he moved like mist between broken buildings. Former warden turned fugitive educator. He now taught children, the ones still forbidden in the hollow, to think for themselves. They came at dusk in ones and twos, silent as snow. He taught them to read by the light of flickering ruin, taught them history not written by victors, taught them to question before they obeyed. He believed education was rebellion, but he could not protect them all. That's when a Dreamtide shepherd arrived. Chapter 2. She walked in barefoot, carried no books, spoke no words at first, but she hummed, soft, low, and filled with memory. Wherever she passed, children stilled, listened. The youngest began remembering dreams they hadn't dared admit aloud. The hunter watched her for days. When he finally spoke, he asked, "Who sent you?" "No one," she said, "but something is coming." "A raid?" A silence. He nodded. "Then teach with me." She smiled. Together, they built a new gate, not of stone or rule, but thought. Each child wrote their own question on a piece of scrap. They pinned them to the gate and walked through. Chapter 3. The raid came, just as she predicted. Officials from the Reclamation Bureau, armor polished, eyes empty. They demanded the children surrender their materials. The Dreamtide shepherd stood in front. She held up one scrap. It read, "Why must my truth frighten you?" The officer froze. Behind him, another stepped forward, hesitated, and removed his helmet. "I asked that question once," he said. Others followed. The raid never happened. The children kept their books, their questions, their futures. Later, Hunter asked the shepherd why she stayed. "Because fear is not the end," she said. "It's the gate to growth, waiting to be walked through." They walked it together, and from that gate, a school was born, not built of bricks, but bravery. And the district of Ireli's Hollow, it stopped hollowing and began to dream. Title: The Smile Beneath the Hollow Sun. Year: 130,384,615.4. Era, Cradle of Titans. Author, Jeremy Levan, and Rise of the Zodiac, Series 2025. Chapter 1. They called it the Hollow Sun. It was at a start, not anymore. A great machine once built to power half the continent. Now a dim shell pulsing above the skyline of Celarith, like a false god with a dying heart. Beneath its synthetic glow, the city functioned in rehearsed silence. Happiness was regulated. Joy was rationed. Laughter above a certain decibel required a license. So naturally, he was an outlaw. The clown who cries Starfire. No one knew where he came from. He appeared at shadow markets, mourning booths, and bureaucratic funerals, his eyes glowing with starlight, his painted face cracked in places too raw for comedy. He performed not to entertain, but to awaken. He once juggled fire at a grief processing center until a widow remembered how to scream. He was dangerous and hunted. The Ministry of Balance called him a joy anarchist, but to the children in the forgotten sectors, he was a hero, especially to one Vin, a maintenance prodigy who hadn't spoken since her parents vanished during the recalibration. Chapter 2. Vin found him bleeding in Tunnel Sector 9. She didn't ask why. She simply dragged him to her bolt hole, patched his rims with filament tape, and offered him the last of her synthesized plum rations. He said nothing, then cried. Not from pain, from being seen. Over the next weeks, he taught her jokes, bad ones, stories, wild ones, magic tricks using leftover parts from broken drones. She showed him where to tap into the old Smile distribution network, where the city once streamed laughter to the masses before they outlawed it. Together they hijacked it, not to spread jokes, but stories, testimonies, small victories, hidden kindnesses, shared meals, songs sung in closets, and held in fear. The city began to flicker with warmth, and the Hollow Sun pulsed in confusion. Chapter 3. The Ministry responded with efficiency. Raid teams, signal blockers, a bounty on the clown's mask. They found his hideout, but only Vane was there. She smiled and broadcast everything. The raids, the faces, the lies, and in the background, the pre-recorded message from the clown. Darkness does not frighten the soul, forgetting the light does. The feed went viral in under an hour, because the people were already waiting to feel, to serve something more than their own numb survival. And so they began to give, not orders, but care. Shelters opened unlicensed. Bread was shared with no tax. Songs erupted from drone silos, and from somewhere nowhere the clown danced again. Only this time he wasn't crying. He was laughing, with starlight in his eyes, and Vin by his side. Because happiness wasn't the absence of pain, it was the choice to offer light, even when no one asked, even when the sun was hollow, especially then. Title: The Honest Thorn. Year: 130,192,307.7. Era: Cradle of Titans. Author: Jeremy Levan, and Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. The last thorn of summer was a walking disaster. Not the kind that brought doom and ruin, but the kind that tripped over prophecy scrolls and accidentally spilled tea on sacred maps. He was the final graduate of the Grove of Intent, a comedy of a druidic order known more for bad timing than herbal wisdom. Still, he had one gift. He could not lie, literally, cursed or blessed, depending on your politics by the goddess of minor mishaps. Every time he tried to fib, the truth spilled out in rhyming couplets. He didn't mind, mostly, until he was summoned to escort a relic to the Archive of Ascension, and found himself paired with the Soul Keeper, a stoic, precise guardian whose soul counted the sins of those nearby. She hated rhymes. After 2, their journey began with silence, then tension, then irritation. But the thorn could not help himself. He told her as she hummed off key when nervous, that she carried a secret ache in her left shoulder, that her favorite snack was roasted plum seed dipped in vinegar. She denied none of it. He smiled. She didn't. Not yet. But as the days passed, her questions grew pointed. Why do you trust strangers? I don't, he replied. I just trust I can survive the truth. What if the truth hurts? Then it's already inside you. Might as well say hello. She frowned, and then laughed, quietly. Chapter 3. They reached the archive, only to find it barricaded by the order of palm-tongueless zealots who believed secrets protected peace. The Soul Keeper moved to fight. The thorn stepped forward, and began rhyming. Each verse peeled open the hypocrisy of silence. Each truth, it gleaned from the zealot's body language, and eyes spilled from him in poetic blasts. Secrets erupted, confessions flew, the barricade fell, and afterward, the Soul Keeper asked him how he bore the burden of always telling the truth. I don't, he said. I just never seal the mistake shut from reflection. She kissed him, gently, honestly, and when they returned home, she shared her sins aloud. He listened, rhymed, laughed, and held her hand, because peace, it turned out, wasn't the absence of lies. It was the presence of someone who never feared your truth, not even when it rhymed, especially then.